Hi everyone. So this is what we're boiled down to now. So we're doing remote learning. Benefits of that is that the lesson should go fairly, no issues whatsoever because there won't be a lot of starting and stopping or anything like that. However, the downfall to that is you don't get immediate support or help from me in the classroom setting. So obviously, if you have any issues with the lesson whatsoever or any of your lab work, you'll contact me via Slack, right? Because that's the first line of defense. Otherwise, you'll just email me, okay? And I'll make sure I keep track of my emails and keep up on them during this time. So yeah, so this kind of sucks, but I will do the best that we can possibly do. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how this is going to go down. So I'm going to record these lessons using the lesson plan creator that I have online at scm.education, which you guys should be using to help, augment your learning. The lesson video will be recorded on Sundays and put up to YouTube on Sundays. So you should have it available to you Monday at any point through your day, depending on when you want to actually, do the lesson. Now, if you're in the Thursday class, I understand that this lesson is going to be a little early for you, but it's up to you whether or not you want to do it Monday or do it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, doesn't really matter. As long as the labs are handed in by the due dates. The due dates are different for Monday versus Thursday based on the day that your class would be delivered. The syllabus has been slightly revised. I haven't loaded it online because you can use the SCM education site for that particular purpose. I'm just going to navigate there real fast. Also looks like OBS is not recording half of my widescreen monitor here. I have an ultra wide monitor. Let me just format this screen so I know what we're actually seeing. You see, Windows wants to take over every time I do that. Yeah, it looks like that is about the distance. So I have this like whole other section over here. All right, not a big deal. Let's go to scm.education. We'll navigate to Introduction to Web Programming. And here's, of course, like the lessons that we're going to try to accomplish before week 14 when you have your final. The final will still occur. It will be at home, obviously, for self-isolation reasons. And it will be delivered via Blackboard at a particular time. I'll let you know what time the final is at. You have to be there for the time period that the final starts. Once the final is closed after its 3-hour period, it stays closed. I'm not reopening it for anybody, so you can't be late for the final when that happens. But I'll let you know more information as we get closer to that date. It'll be in April, so it's a little ways away, but I'll make sure you have tons of information before that point. The final will be the same way as the midterm: open book, open internet, open colleagues. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves, obviously not together, but like on Discord or Slack or whatever. Yeah, same idea. Anyways, so we've already done the validation, sanitization, and normalization, or at least we did on the Thursday class. I know the Monday class missed that one. However, authentication basically goes over those same three disciplines anyways, and because it covers it, you're going to basically get a recap of those three anyways. So Thursday, yeah, it's going to feel like you've already heard this. However, it's embedded into authentication, so you shouldn't really notice, hopefully. Yeah, and then Monday, yeah, you're going to get authentication. So we did start the authentication process and we went through registration. However, I'm going to record the whole lesson in one go so that you have all of that information. So this might feel like a smaller lesson. You can just skip ahead in the video to the point where you finished off and then start from that point. That's totally up to you. Or you can just follow along with the whole lesson. There is a lab now with this lesson as well, but it's going to be a lab for lesson 7 and 8, so double the points for it, right? So it's worth 6% of your final grade as opposed to 3% of your final grade. Next week we'll be doing lessons 9 and 10, parent-child relationships. I might record both lessons in one go. Obviously, I'll break it apart into 2 videos. and it's totally up to you if you want to do both of them at the same time, but they will cover over 2 weeks of course material. And then lesson 11 will be working with files. And then lesson 12 will be error handling in PHP. Now, I might be a little ambitious because I think we only actually get 3 weeks until the final. So error handling in PHP and working with files might wind up being one lesson just to cover it up, and I'll condense it so it doesn't feel like a ton of work. But yeah, the lessons themselves will be written out fully here, but I'll condense the lesson when I do the recording. All right, so yeah, that's basically what's going to happen. There'll still be labs. I'm not sure about quizzes yet. I'm still debating on whether I'm going to do the quizzes at all. Or if I just might take your current quizzes, reopen them all for you, let you guys retake them all if you want to, and then just mark those as being the quizzes that have been done for the 20% of quiz marks, which is probably what I'm going to do just to help alleviate a bit of that course load, just because we've lost a full week and it makes it a little difficult to create those lessons. All right, so let's dive in. We're going to dive into authentication. Now, I know my screen doesn't look the same as yours. Yours looks like this. Mine is the admin panel. So, yeah, we're going to start by introducing authentication. And like I said, if you don't want to go through all this again, you can feel free to just scrub ahead in the video and start off where you left off before the break, before our COVID-19 break. All right. Okay, so let's get to it. All right, so why do we use authentication? So authentication helps us to restrict access to content and functionality within our online application, right? Authentication is a strong part of software web development. So without authentication, the entire internet would be public, and there's people definitely that would love that. However, for that kind of personal experience or to protect our assets, so to speak, we definitely want to have authentication, right? We don't want other people to be able to post Facebook messages. We don't want them to post to our Instagram feed, be able to order products on our Amazon accounts, right? Or even watch Netflix using our account. And that's the reason why we need authentication, to stop that from happening. So there are various strategies to authentication. The simplest one, the one that we're going to utilize, is basically username and password, right? So the idea is that the username and password is stored in a database for easy access. Because databases are fairly secure, but they can be hacked. Think of like huge databases like Target and even Facebook, actually, that have been hacked in the past, right? And accounts have been taken from them. That's why it's very important that when we store things like passwords, we should be storing them either hashed or encrypted, so that if somebody does get the database, it's very difficult for them to decode those passwords. If they're one-way hashed, it's almost impossible for them to decode the passwords. So that's one reason why we want to make sure that we store them in a hashed method in the database. So hashing is unidirectional method of cryptography. This means the information can be encrypted but never decrypted. So this renders the information useless to anyone who finds it. However, it also means that if a user forgets their password, you have to employ a password reset strategy, because you can't even retrieve their password. Once the password is stored, that's it. It's hashed. Nobody has access to that password except for the person who remembers the password. Another strategy for authentication uses API tokens. This is basically done by giving an application key and a secret, almost the same as like a username and password idea. They can make a request with these two pieces of information, and then we give them a token that expires after a period of time, and then they make future requests with that token. This is still, like I said, similar to the simple password process, but generally API token authentication is used for RESTful APIs, where you're only retrieving data and there's no visual side to your application. So authentication is constantly being analyzed by both security experts and hackers, right? So you got to keep that in mind. The simple username password often isn't enough to stop bots who are, reading large dictionaries of authentication usernames and passwords. And they're trying to just basically brute force their way through your authentication. That's why many services that these bots are actually trying to access, like Google, AWS, Netflix, they allow for something called two-factor authentication. The idea is that it still uses the username and password like you would normally, However, it also uses a time-sensitive key, so that when the person logs in, you either receive the time-sensitive key through your message, like text message, or they'll phone it, or you have to use like an app like Authy in order to get your time-sensitive key. And then you use that key to log in, and then that's your dual authentication. So the idea is that even if they have the username and password in a dictionary, and they're able to gain access with that, they don't have your key, so they can't get through even with those two pieces of information. And often, if they have attempted the login, you'll receive an email letting you know that somebody has attempted that login using those details. So let's take a look at the username and password strategy. I've got it here up on the display. Right, so this is a quick glance at a simple application. It has a home page that everybody can view, right? So it's nice and public. It also has the login page, the registration page, and our notification page. We're going to do notification a bit differently in our application. We're going to do basically inline notification, where it shows up on any page you wind up accessing. Notifications are little messages that we have that we can send back to the user. So everybody can access home, and you want that, right? Because when they access home, that's your landing page. That's your point of access to sell yourself, right? However, the login page is also public, which makes sense, because how else would they log in if it was on the other side of the wall? And registration, again, this particular site requires registration on the public side. So think of like Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, something like that, as opposed to an application like our GShift app, for example, where our sales team actually has to create you and then just provides you login details. So the registration in our particular application would be on the other side. So again, even though the views are on the public side, also the processing scripts have to be on the public side as well. So obviously when login goes to authenticate, we don't want to check to see if they're already authenticated before we authenticate them. That would be redundant. So we authenticate them, and then we open the portal into the authenticated side, and then they can access these 5 different pieces. When they register, we need insert to also be on the public side, because they don't need to be authenticated in order to register. So they register, we take their data, and we insert it into the database, obviously after we perform some very necessary steps like validation, sanitization, and normalization. Once they're on the other side, all of this is authenticated actions, so they can view their profile, edit their profile, or update their profile, or even delete themselves, right? You got to take a look at the new European rules, which state that all users must be able to remove themselves from your application entirely. And they can also log out. And it kind of makes sense that logout is on the authenticated side, because really, why should they be able to log out if they're not even logged in, right? But I have seen this as kind of like a nice little middle piece where it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, logging out doesn't make a difference even if you're not logged in. If you access the logout script, it's going to do the same process every time, which is it's going to remove your session key, which essentially basically logs you out. So it doesn't really matter which side this is on. We're going to put it on the logout. We're going to put it on the authenticated side and treat it as though it's authenticated page. However, I have seen in applications before where it's just sitting in the middle between the two. In our GShift app, our logout is on our authenticated side, mostly because it actually commits, it like inserts some new information into our database about your session when you hit logout. So because of that, we have it on the authenticated side. So our next step, after actually taking a look at what type of authentication we're going to use, and like I said, we could use other types of authentication. We could use API token, we could use dual factor authentication, stuff like that. But I feel when you're learning authentication, this process that we're looking at here on the screen is the most simplified version of authentication, and it makes more sense to do this before jumping into, you know, the deep end with JWTs and stuff like that. Let's take a look at actually registering a user. So we're going to take a look at the SQL database for this. I'm going to pull it open over here. So here's our workbench, right? We've been using this examples database, and we'll continue to use the examples database. for now. So I've added a new table in here called users, and let's send it to the SQL. There we go. So this is what the database or what the table looks like for the database examples. So we have a table called users, right? Nothing new. They have an ID column, and it's our primary index. We also have a first name and last name, so we can store some information about the user so we know who they are. We have their email address and their password. And we have this new thing that you probably haven't seen before called a unique key. What the purpose of the unique key is it basically says that the email address has to be unique within the database table. Now, unique keys can be costly, just to let you know. If you have millions and millions and millions upon millions of users, every time this actually goes to build a new user, it has to scan the database and check to see if the email address has already been used, or whatever field you've chosen as a unique key. If it's been used, then it's going to come back and tell you that this has been used prior, and you need to correct the problem. Now, it happens pretty quickly. However, like I said, if you have a database of millions upon millions of users, this could definitely be a little slow. So, not a big deal. We're going to put it in because we actually require it. We want to make sure the email is unique and that the user isn't putting in an email address that they already have. The other way to do this process is to do it on the PHP side instead of on the MySQL side. On the PHP side, what we would do is we would check to see if the user exists already, and if they exist, then we would return back to the user who's trying to create that this email is already in use and they need to correct their email detail. However, with doing it within MySQL, we're putting the heavy lifting on the SQL side as opposed to putting it on the PHP side. That's all. This will return an error message to us, but once again, MySQL tends to be a black box. We send it a request. We have no idea if it worked or not unless we actually query it and say, hey, did that last thing work or do you have an error? And we'll have to do the same thing, only we're going to do it with PDO, which we talked a little bit about in class. We're going to use PDO to, so we'll have to use PDO to get the errors back, and they come back as numerical errors. So we'll have to check the number basically to see if that is the error or if it's something else. All right. So that's what our database table looks like. This is already inside the examples table. Your connection script that I'm providing you already contains the information to connect to this AWS table, so you don't actually need to create that table in your local database unless you really want to. It's totally, completely up to you. So that leads us to the next step. We're going to actually try to create our users. So let's go to Blackboard. And this is applicable for either shell. So if you're on PHP 2, then obviously you just go to PHP 2. The steps are exactly the same. So we're going to go to Weekly Learning, Lesson 8 Authentication, and we're going to pull down these starter files. I'm going to show the starter files in a folder here. I'm going to right-click on them and choose to extract all, and I'm just going to click Extract. Now, often it will just open up the folder for you, and what you'll notice, if I close this off, here's our folder that it created. I'm going to get rid of all these other things that I have here. Just get rid of all those. There we go. So here's our starter files. If I double-click, notice I have a folder within a folder, and I double-click again, and there's my actual files. Sorry. So I'm going to go up a level. I'm going to right-click and choose to copy this. And then I'm going to navigate to my WAMP directory. So I'm going to open up WAMP. And I'm just going to wait for it to open up. It's hard for you to see because it's actually over to the right-hand side of my screen here. And unfortunately, OBS actually locks off part of this. So it's kind of annoying, but I'm clicking on the W, and I'm just going to have to walk you through this. I'm clicking on the W, and I'm choosing www directory, which will open up the www directory for me. So this is the directory, obviously, that our Apache server delivers as our public folder. So I'm going to go into our www directory. Now I'm on my home computer, not my laptop, so I've only got a couple of lessons in here. I'm going to create a, actually I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go here, I'm going to copy this, jump back over to my folder, and I'm going to paste it. And then I'm going to rename it as lesson 08. Once I've done that, I'm going to double click it. And yep, I've got all my folders in there. I'm just going to click anywhere in here so no folder, no file is highlighted. And I'm going to right click and choose to open with code. And there we go. It's opened over here. So give me 1 second just to... And there we go. So I'll put my other files over here, and I'll leave this over here for now. Okay, so let's take a look. We need the... so this code is open. Hold on. Oh yeah, we want to open up the actual lesson itself into our browser. So I'm just going to bring my browser over here and go to localhost /comp-1006 and hit enter. Oh, right. I've got some issues here. Just 1 second. I want this to look exactly the same as yours. Okay, let's try that again here. So comp/comp1006. There's my lesson 8. Click on it. And there's our starting application. So here's our home page, right? Just a nice basic home page with a register button and a login button. If we click on register, it takes us to this wonderful form. Despite the styling being something unique to you, the form itself is the same as any basic form. Here's our first name and our last name, just like it was in our database. Our email confirmation, which is not in the database. We'll talk about that in a second. Our password and our password confirmation, which is also not in the database. The email and email confirmation, the purpose of this field is so that we can make sure that the user, when they've entered in their email address, that it matches the email address, that this confirms that that's the way they want the email address to be spelled. You want these two fields to be identical, because if they're not, then they've made a mistake, and you want them to correct that mistake. Same with password. You want them to enter it twice. That way it's guaranteed that the password they're entering is correct, especially considering when they enter a password, it's obscured from them. So they need to be able to confirm it on the other side. That way everything is nice and clean. All right, so the first thing we're going to do before we actually get into any part of this is we are just going to enter in some information in here. So I'm going to enter in Sean McKinnon. I'll do Sean.McKinnon at, yeah, let's do that one. Now you notice my autocomplete actually fills in both fields, which is kind of nice. I'm going to do my password as ASDF and ASDF, and I'm going to click register. And nothing's going to happen. I'm going to have a nice blank page. And the reason why I have a blank page is because this code obviously has not been completed yet. So we'll need to go through and actually complete that code. So let's take a look at one thing before we actually go through this process. Let's discuss inserting our new user. So before we can write the user to our database, we need to consider a few common strategies for dealing with user data. And those are validation, normalization, and sanitization. Let's start with validation strategies. So in our last lesson, which some of you may have done or some of you may not have done, we would validate the various steps of the data, right? Is it empty? Is it in the correct format? Does it match? Then if any of those failed, we would output a message that basically would tell the user that there was an error, and then we'd exit the program. However, this is kind of poor form. Processing files need to process, right? We learned that in lesson 6. Processing files should only process. They shouldn't be actually spitting back out any view data, right? So what we did was we created a notification page where if anything went wrong or if anything was good, it would send them to the notification page and let them know. This time we're going to do it in a different way. The other issue that there is as well is that when the user makes a mistake, by sending them to the notification page, we're not allowing them to correct the mistake. They have to navigate from the notification page all the way back to the form and then correct their mistake, not even really realizing what data needs to be fixed. In this scenario that I've got displayed here, this kind of corrects this problem. So here's Tom. Hi, Tom. Tom's going to register on .php, and he's going to fill out his first name, last name, email, and password. It appears that Tom's name is Sean, but whatever. He's going to click submit. That's going to create our post associative array, right? PHP does this with the post body. It takes the post body and it converts it into this associative array. The associative array then gets sent through to insert.php, where we can access the values by just simply accessing $_post, and we will have all these values in there. What we're going to do is check to see if this information is valid. So first check will be to make sure that all these fields are filled and they're not empty, and sure enough they are, right? Sean McKinnon, s.m@g.com, and their password ASDF1234. That's an important thing to understand as well, is that the password is not obfuscated from us on the back end. We get it as raw text, and we have a certain amount of what's the word I'm looking for? Responsibility, that we don't take that password and do anything that might put the user at risk with it. It's also important for you to understand that because that password is raw text, when you're signing up to different applications across the internet, all applications have access to that password that you're putting into their database. So you need to be careful that they're not storing your password as raw text in their database. For example, Target, who did that and then got hacked and all their password information was pulled out. And you might wonder, well, what does it matter even if they got my password? So what, they can log into this one stupid site. But you need to understand that hackers aren't looking to log into the, the mom and pop shop site that you may have signed up for. They want password and login information that they're going to use that hopefully you have duplicated across other sites, as most people do. They're going to take that information and use it to access Netflix. They're going to use it to access Google or your bank or any other information that they want because you happen to use the password over and over again. That's why it's usually a good idea not to use passwords repeatedly, to use something like 1Pass or LastPass, which basically gives you one password to log into those applications, and then within those applications, they have thousands of passwords that you can assign to different well, actually they have an unlimited number of passwords that you can assign to different services, and then you're using that password to access the service. But you don't need to remember it because LastPass or 1Pass will remember it for you. Anyways, so we send this through to insert.php and we check to see if it's valid. So we're going to check to see that these are all the required fields have data. We're going to check and make sure that the email matches the email confirmation. We're going to check to make sure password matches password confirmation. Once we know everything's valid, we'll log them in. If anything is invalid, we're going to send them back to the register.php page. Only thing is, though, is we're going to repopulate the form with their post values. And the way we do this is because post only lives for the life cycle of the request, we need to understand that once we go back and navigate back to register.php, this whole data block is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So we need to use a super global that maintains that data for longer than post does. And the best one to use obviously is session. Session will maintain the data for the life of the browser or until we destroy the session ourselves. So if the user doesn't have a valid form, we'll assign the form values from the post global into the session global under a key called form values. We'll pass that back to register.php, and then what we'll do is extract those values and populate the form for them so that they can fill out and correct any issues that they had in the form. So obviously coding this is going to help this make a lot more sense. So we're on our blank page right now. We have our insert.php. Why don't we start with our first step, which is validating whether or not the user has the correct data. So I'm going to open up this page here. Too many screens. There we go. So here's our lesson 8. Let me just make sure in OBS that you can see that okay. Yeah, you should be able to see that okay. So our first step is to create our validation. So we're going to go to insert.php. We're going to create our opening PHP tag. And we don't necessarily need to create a closing PHP tag because this whole page is just going to be PHP. There's not going to be any HTML on this page. So our first step is validation. And the best way to do this, there's a couple of ways we could do this, but the best way to do this is to actually go through all the data, figure out which data is not valid and for what reasons it's not valid, accumulate all the error messages that we need for the user in like an errors array, and then send all those error messages back to the user for them to resolve the issue. Not take one at a time and send it back to them one at a time, because the issue there is that maybe something else has a problem. They're not going to fix it. They're going to fix the first error that they have, resubmit, get sent back, and now they have to correct the second error. It's really not a good user experience. It's better just to give them all the errors that they need to correct and let them correct them all at the same time. So we're going to create, oops, helps if I hit caps lock. We're going to create an array to hold all the field, let's try to spell that with correct letters, field errors. So we'll do errors equals square brackets, like so. And then we'll record our errors into there. All right, you may notice a bit of a time jump here. The reason being is because I realized that as I'm typing, the clicking noise on my keyboard, because I have a mechanical keyboard, is probably being picked up by the microphone on the camera. I apologize, that's probably going to be the case. I've moved the camera slightly away from me, from the keyboard, so hopefully it won't pick up the keyboard, but if it does, all I can do is apologize. From what I heard though, you don't really, I'm not getting drowned out by the keyboard. That's really all that's important there. So yeah, again, I apologize if that's the case. All right, so errors is going to hold all the error messages that we accumulate as we find validation problems. The first validation problem we're going to look for is that the required fields are present, right? So we want to make sure that all the required fields have the data that they're supposed to. So let's start with that. We're going to validate the necessary fields are not empty. So that's our first step. And we could literally check each one individually. We could go, if empty, which is a function in PHP that checks to see if a string has a value or not, $_post, and then put in first name, because that's the first one we're going to check. So if it's empty, then we'll take errors and we'll push, the first name cannot be empty, which, that works, but the problem is we have to do this 6 times. I don't want to do this 6 times when we can easily do it in one go. So the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to create a variable called required fields with an empty array. Well, it's only empty for the next 2 seconds. Then I'm going to add all the required field keys in. So these are the keys that I'm taking from the name field inside our form. So if you look at the form, which is called register, it's these keys that I'm taking. So first name, last name, email, so on and so forth, right? So I'm going to take all those and I'm going to put them in here like so. Oops. Like so. Now we could also do email confirmation and password confirmation, but if we think about this logically for a second, it doesn't really matter if email confirmation and password confirmation are empty. Because further down, we're going to validate that email and email confirmation match. And we're going to validate that password and password confirmation match. And if they're empty, then they don't match, and that will result in an error anyways. So we're going to save, not even a millisecond of time by just not validating those 2 fields. So our next step is to run a for each loop. We'll iterate over the required fields, putting each item into this variable called field. And I've had a few questions about the for each loop from students, not fully understanding how this works. Basically what happens is for each will iterate through each of these 4 items that are inside here. And as it starts with an item, right? The cursor first starts on the first item. It's going to take that item and it's going to pass it into a variable on the other side that you define. You define this variable. It doesn't have to be called field. It could be called Bob. It doesn't really matter. We're going to call it field because it makes sense, right? But anyways, it passes it into this field, and then this variable is now available within this block. Okay? So, and it only contains one of these, not all of these, right? Which is good because that's what you want. You want on each iteration to just have one item at a time. So the first time this goes through, we're going to start with first name, and then we can go ahead and check to see if it's empty. Now, here's the next piece. We're not checking if first name is empty. We want to know if the post value at the key of first name is empty, right? So the first time we execute this, it would look like that, right? So field would evaluate to first name, the string first name, and we'd be looking at the key of post first name, right? So hopefully you remember that when we submit our form, the post is made up of all of these keys, right? That's basically what we're extracting there. We're extracting that key. So hopefully that makes sense. So if it's empty, right, meaning that they didn't fill out the field, then we want to add an error, but we want to make sure that we're not adding errors. Like we could write this, for example, we could write errors, and we'll use the push syntax. So this pushes the error onto the array. If you have difficulty remembering that, take a look at lesson 3, I think it is, where we actually go through the differences of array push and using this push syntax. We're going to write you cannot leave the $ field blank. So the problem with this is that when it goes through on email and password, this will make sense. But when it goes through on first name, last name, it's going to say you cannot leave the first underscore name blank. And the problem with that is that people will get hung up on these underscores. I know it sounds super silly, but they will. They'll get hung up on the underscore and not understand what you're talking about and not know what to fix, right? So what we want to do is just remove the underscore just to create a little bit of a better user experience. And that's super easy. We're just going to call this human field, which just means that it's human readable. We'll use the PHP function called string replace. String replace takes 3 arguments. It takes the needle, which is the thing that you're looking for. What we're looking for is the underscore character. So we're going to find this underscore character. It wants to know what you want to replace the underscore with, so we're going to replace it with a space. So this underscore will take out like so and replace it with a space. So now it's just first space name. And then where are we replacing this? What is our haystack? So our haystack will be $ field, because that's the thing that contains this value. So we're looking for the underscore, replacing it with a space in the $ field. Now we can call this human field, like so, and each error will get replaced with this human field that we just created. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that's going to look like. What we'll do is we'll just var dump $errors down here, right? And then we'll navigate back to our form. So here's our form page, right? We'll navigate back to this page. We'll just hit refresh so the whole page is empty and click register. Okay, so it looks like our fields are not showing up. We need them to show up. I'm not sure why they're not showing up. Oh, actually, I do know why they're not showing up. Give me 1 second. All right, so the reason why they're not showing up is because I actually have, to make this address look the same as yours, I have it running on my D drive, and I forgot I didn't open my code for my D drive. I opened it from my C drive, so obviously everything I was doing wasn't reflecting. Okay, so I fixed that. So if I refresh, hit continue, There you go. You can see we have our 4 error messages. You cannot leave first name blank. Notice it doesn't say first underscore name. You cannot leave the last name blank and then email and password. So hopefully that makes sense. So this code is handling that. It's string replacing the underscore with a space inside the field, which is these guys here. Cool. All right, let's get rid of this var dump. We don't need it. There's no reason to keep it. And we'll move on to the next thing that we're going to need to validate. So the next thing we're going to need to validate is the email address. So validate the email address matches the email confirmation. So we'll do that step first. So we'll say, and this is easy. We'll just say if $_post email does not match $_post email confirmation, right? We can just get away with a simple logical operator, right? Just using this comparison operator to match these two to see whether or not they match. If it doesn't match, then we just push an error on. The email must match the email confirmation. Oh, just confirmation, that's fine too. Now, because we only have a single statement in here, we actually don't need these curly braces. If you wanted to, you can eliminate the curly braces, like so. Some people will disagree with this because they say that this is not clear when it's on one line like this. So what some people will do is they'll move it down a line, like so. So there's the comparison, and then this statement immediately is the executed statement based on this condition check. However, what you'll also know, if you do echo hello, no matter what, echo hello is going to execute because it's actually not a part of this block. It looks like it is, but it isn't. And the reason it isn't is because only the immediately following statement gets executed from this block. That's the way that works. So if this is, let's just reverse this statement so that it winds up being false. You're going to see that echo hello gets output, but errors does not. Let's just var dump errors again so you can see that. So the email must match the email confirmation. So right now the condition is true, right? So let's change this back because they actually do match because they're both empty. So they would match. So we'll change this back so that both this condition is now true. This message, sorry, this condition is now false. Sorry. So this should never output, but you'll still see echo hello. Okay, not sure why that's not working. That should totally not do what it's doing. Let's try that again. Oh, right, it's up here. Sorry, wasn't paying attention. So there it goes, hello, KSDD, blah, 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 right? And the reason is because it's not in the block. So if we were to wrap it in a block, notice it's gone away, and that's because all these statements are inside this conditional block. So while you can get rid of the curly braces, keep in mind that only the immediate following statement will be a part of the conditional block. Nothing else will be a part of the conditional block. This tabbing has nothing to do with it, whether or not this was all the way beside the if condition, all the way outside of the if condition, it doesn't matter. It's not a part of the block, right? Or sorry, it's automatically a part of the block, whatever the following statement is. So my rule of thumb is if it takes up a lot of room and you can't put it on the same line as the if condition, then just write in the curly braces. It makes it more human readable for other developers that are looking at your code. That's that's just my rule of thumb. If it can take up one line and still be readable, then I do it that way. All right, so back from the rabbit hole. Our next check, so we validated whether or not the email address matches the email confirmation. We also need to validate the email address is in the correct format. That's a big one. So we're going to say if $_post email. So we want to make sure that the email, no, see, I've gone down another, I haven't been paying attention to myself. Here we go, sorry. If not filter var will actually take our string and compare it against a an expression, like a regular expression, like a pattern, in this particular format. This is one of these PHP functions that I'm not a big fan of. The reason why I'm not a fan of it is because it doesn't output or return the same data type each time. So in this particular scenario, where filter validate email, it will return a Boolean value if this doesn't match the pattern that this is requesting. And the issue with that is that if we change this to sanitize email returns a string. So if you use validate, it returns a Boolean. If you use sanitize, it returns a string, which is, you know, that's not really good. I don't know, that just feels bad. Feels like bad programming to me, that filter var should return the same data type every time. It should be expected, not a Boolean in some instances and a string in other instances. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. And then we want to add an error. And we're going to say the email, spelled correctly, isn't in a valid format. There we go. So there's our two email handlers, our two email validation checks. Last thing we want to do with our validation is validate the password matches the password confirmation. And that is literally identical to what we did with email up here. So if $_post password does not match $_post password confirmation, then we'll push another error on. The password doesn't match the password confirmation. There we go. So there's all of our error messages. Let's just var dump our errors to see what we've got here and make sure everything is working. We'll jump back over to our browser. We'll go back to here. So to make sure that everything is working, just put a password in and put an email confirmation in. So actually, no, leave password empty. Do password confirmation and then an email address. There we go. And then click register. There we go. So we've got all of our error messages. You cannot leave the first name blank. We did. Cannot leave the last name blank. Sorry, but we did. Same with email and password. Left them all blank like bad people we are. The email must match the email confirmation. It doesn't, because the email confirmation is asdf@asdf.com, but email is blank. The email isn't in a valid format. That is correct, because blank is not a valid format. And the password doesn't match the password confirmation. Also very true, because password confirmation is ASDF and the password is blank. So all of our validation checks work. Now we're on to our next step, which is to start handling those errors. So our sanitization check will result in some errors. Normalization doesn't result in errors at all, but our sanitization check will result in some errors. However, at this point, we're more dealing with the data itself and making sure that everything is basically in the correct types of formats that we want it to be in. We're not really dealing with unique emails or that your password is in X number of characters, though we would check that here if we were to do that. But the unique email address, we're not checking that here. We're going to check that further down because the database is going to tell us that issue. So what we'll do here is handle our error response. and we'll deal with our errors right now. So first thing we're going to do is check to see if we have any errors. This is a simple check. We're going to use the function built into PHP called count, which takes an array as an argument, counts the number of items in the array, and returns back an integer. And then we're just going to compare that to 0. So basically, if there are any errors whatsoever, if count errors is greater than 0, then we're going to start our session. And we're going to take our form values from post and store them into this new session key called form values. So just like we talked about in this image here, so that we can repopulate the form. So this is storing our form values. Next, we're going to store our error messages because we want to be able to return our error messages back to the user. So we'll just create, again, a new session key called errors. And all we have to do is make it equal to $errors. Nice and simple. Then we'll redirect. Back to register.php. And very important, we'll exit, because if we don't exit, what will happen, our page will continue to process, the script will continue to process, and further down here, we're going to actually insert the user into the database. We don't want that code to execute after this exit point, right? We want to make sure that if we have an error, we return back and we don't insert the invalid user into the database. So it's very important to exit. Don't forget to exit. All right. So now that we've got all this, let's go back here. We'll return back to our form and just hit register again, and notice it comes back to the page. However, the ASDF at asdf.com didn't repopulate here in email confirmation, and the password confirmation of ASDF didn't populate as well. That's normal though. Password and password confirmation, we won't repopulate those values. It doesn't make sense to. It's almost like a punishment. You screwed up, so now you got to enter in those pieces of information again. That's the idea. The other reason we don't automatically populate it is because it shows up as dots. It doesn't show up as the actual values. The user's going to get freaked out and not know what the dots are representing. So it's better for us to just leave them blank and force them to add their own information back in. All right, so we're back at the register.php page, but we're not seeing our values. In order to see our values, we need to actually get them from the session. So let's write a PHP block at the top of our page on register.php. And before we render the form, let's get our form values. So we'll start the session. Nice. And then we'll create a variable called form values, and we'll make it equal to session form values. Now, we're going to have an issue here because, yes, it's great that we're going to get the form values and store them. And if we refresh here, everything's going to be fine. We're not going to get any error messages. The only reason being is because we actually have session form values. However, what we want to make sure we do is when we go through this process that we unset these values so they don't stay in our system every time we navigate to the form. Otherwise, it will keep populating with whatever is sitting inside this session key. So we're going to unset it. To clear it every time the form gets processed, which is fine. So the user registers, it goes to the registration or to the insert.php. Insert.php finds some errors, records the form values back to the session form values, and returns you back to the page, and the page populates. Then we unset them. If they refresh the page will go blank, which is what we want. However, we're going to have a different error. First refresh will work because we had form values. Now they're unset, so we have no form values now. Refresh again, and notice this wonderful error that we have. Undefined index form values in our register.php page on line 4. And sure enough, that's the case, because this key no longer exists because we unset it. It's just like creating or trying to access a variable that doesn't exist. You get the same idea. Undefined index form values refers to this index not existing. So to correct that issue, we basically need to say, if this is set, then use it, otherwise use null. So one way to do that is to use something called a ternary, where we do is set, and then that's our condition check. So is this set, which will return a Boolean value. If it is, then we're going to return session form values. Otherwise, that's what this little colon means, or we're going to return null. Okay, so a nice long statement, still shorter than using an if-else condition, right? But we can actually make this a lot more condensed. PHP 7 introduced the, it's an OR operator. It's not like your typical OR operator where it's OR. This would actually return a Boolean. Instead, it's double question marks. And basically what this means is this set? It wants to know, is this set? Does it exist? Is it defined? Is it not false? Is it not null? Right? And if it's good, then it's going to return back the value of this. Otherwise, it's going to return null. So if this is defined and ready to go, then it will return it. Otherwise, it returns the right-hand side. So now we're protected, because now if I refresh, yeah, see the error message goes away. So I'm going to add my asdf@asdf.com and asdf password. I'm going to click register, and right now inside here we have form values, but again, they're still not appearing. And if I refresh, they're still not going to appear. And there's nothing we can do about that unless we take the values and actually display them as values inside our form. So we have our form values sitting in here. Let's scroll down to where we have first name. And we're going to add a value attribute there and output $form values first name. And the reason this works is because we've literally just taken that $_post, added it to the session form values, and then we've taken session form values and assigned them off to form values, the variable. And so we're just literally passing this associative array around. So here we are, we're checking, we're basically stating, okay, output the form values in here. Everything should be good, right? Hit refresh. Cool, nothing worked. Hit refresh again. Nothing's working. We're still not seeing any values out in the form. If we add ASDF and hit register, though, you'll notice that we have our form value output there and everything is good. If we refresh, it disappears. So this will work because form values is currently equal to null. I'm not sure why this isn't causing an issue. We're trying to, once again, access an index that doesn't exist. So this should blow up. I'm not entirely clear why it's not blowing up, because it's definitely not defined. All right, cool. Yeah, not entirely sure why that's not blowing up. Let's just do a quick test, because sometimes tests are necessary. Let's do a var dump of $form values, which should be null. Yeah, it's null, so we definitely shouldn't be able to access that. I wonder if I was to echo, because that's literally what we just wrote down there. Huh, that's very interesting. I didn't know that. Just null. That's interesting. I didn't know that. So I guess it just implicitly returns null if you try to access it, instead of blowing up in your face and telling you the index isn't defined. Which is interesting, because this one does not work like that. That is definitely index undefined. All right, so I guess we can get away with a little less code then. We'll just write value equals $form values last name. There we go. And then we'll do the same for the email address. like so, and then we'll leave email confirmation empty to force them to confirm the email address. And the password and password confirmation, for the reasons I explained, we'll leave empty as well. So let's make sure we don't have any var dumps up here. We don't. So those are the values here that you're entering in this one here. And this one, oh right, it's Alt on Windows. Alt. So those three are the ones that you need to enter. All right, so we'll refresh this page. We'll fill in ESDF. We'll fill in ASDF@asdf.com. We'll create our password of ASDF. So what should happen here is we should see, actually we can fill in all of these. There we go. So these two don't match because this is ADSF and this is ASDF. This one doesn't match because this is ASDF and this is blank. And then these two will match. If I click register all of these fields, this field should go away, this field should disappear, but these three fields should remain with a value. And sure enough, that's the case. We have a value, and a value, empty, empty, empty. However, you'll notice that we have no message up here, and to be quite honest, when a user hits a page like this, and this happens, they're going to wind up not fully understanding what has occurred here. They're going to think, oh, okay, cool, so I hit register, I must have done something wrong. I'll try it again, and they'll just keep doing it, and they'll just keep coming back, and they won't understand what's going on. We want to make sure we give them some messages at the top so they know what to correct, because right now they don't know what to correct. So in order to fix that issue, we're going to have to create some notifications. Notifications are integral to a good application. They allow us to communicate with the user to ensure they understand what is happening with their request. We use notifications not only for errors, but also for success messages, info messages, warning messages, any type of message that we want to do. We'll use notifications because it's our way to communicate with them. Because notifications need to be able to be displayed on any page that we have, it makes sense to make them as a reusable HTML portion. So what we'll do is we'll create a partial called notification and then use that and just include it on any page that we need, which is any view that we have. So I've already created the file for you called notification.php. We just need to start adding the code into it. So the first bit that we need to add is our PHP tags. And we do need an opening and closing PHP tag this time, because we're going to have some HTML on this page as well. So first we want to check if the session is running. And this is important because we're including this on every page. Some pages already have session start on them. And you might remember way back when we talked about global variables that sessions can't be started multiple times. You have to start them once, and if they're already running, you're going to use that session. So we need to do a check. We need to check if the session has already been started. So we can do if session status, which will check the status of the session, and we can compare it to a PHP constant that's defined at runtime here called session none. So we're basically saying if the session status is not running, right? If there's no session running, then session start, which will start the session. So this is one of those times where writing it all on one line actually works because it reads nicely. You can put the curly braces around this if you want to define where it actually is in the block. So that's cool. So we'll start the session if it isn't already running. Next, we're going to basically repeat the same process that we did with the form values, but this time with errors. We're going to store the errors and clear the session variable. So we're going to create a variable called errors, assign it errors, but remember, if this doesn't exist, we're going to get an index error here. So we need to do the or null. Then we're going to store the success messages and clear the session variable. So we're going to do the same process that we just did above, but with successes, which we haven't created a success yet, but we will. There we go. and then we're going to clear. So unset. So that will clear all the error messages, and unset. That will clear the success messages, which hopefully makes sense. We don't want the errors in the success messages being carried from page to page, right? Because they're going to start to not make sense. And we want to make sure that we basically get rid of those messages so that the user only sees the error messages once or the success messages once, and it's in context with what they're currently working in. Otherwise, we just clear them and then they're gone, right? So our next step is we only want to show the HTML if there is an actual error or success, right? We don't want to show it if there's nothing wrong. So what we'll do is we'll use PHP, and I'm going to write this in two formats. So we're going to say if $errors, so if errors, meaning it's not null, right? It's not undefined, it's not false. We have errors, right? So if errors. Now, I want to write my HTML, but I don't want to obstruct it with these PHP tags. I don't want to write echo, 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 echo for all my HTML because I think it looks janky. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close, and I'm going to open, and then write my HTML in here. Now, if you look at this, this isn't very readable, and at some point, this curly brace here is going to become very difficult to understand what it's actually closing, right? Because as you get more code in here, at some point it's just going to be some arbitrary curly brace down at the bottom of your script, and you're not going to have a clue what it's for. That's why PHP actually introduced a better syntax for this type of operation. What you do instead is you end this with a colon, and then down here you have end if. So now you know that this end if is closing an if block. You may not remember what if block, but if you're using tabbing, hopefully it becomes simpler to what you're actually closing. It'd be nice if the actual IDE treated this as a proper closing brace, but it doesn't. But at least you would have more context of what is being closed. Because these are so small, we can actually just write these all on the same line. Like so. And then now our HTML just goes in the middle, and our HTML becomes conditional HTML because unless this condition is true, anything inside this block won't be rendered. So now we can go ahead and write out our actual code here. So we're going to write a for each loop because we want to iterate through all of the errors. So we can write it like so. And we can end it in a colon. And then we can write PHP end for each down here. Like so. So again, this closing is just like as if we were using braces, except for now it's a little bit easier to know what's closing what. Some people might not like having to open and close PHP like this over and over again. I just find it a little bit more readable to do these as separated lines. Now we can write the actual div, which is purely HTML. Alert, alert danger, close it. And then we can echo out the error. So we'll just do equals $error and the break tag. Nice and simple. And then to do the same thing for the success messages, we'll just duplicate this. Change these to the word successes. And then these to the word success. Now our notification can be included at the top of our register page, our index page, basically any view that we're working with. So I'm going to go to register first. And we're going to include it. Actually, it's already included. I've already got it at the top here. So that's basically what we want. It needs to also exist on the index page. So if we go to the index page, it already is. And we're going to want it on the profile page, which it already is. So we're good. We have it on every page that we need it to be on. you don't actually need to do anything. So now I'm going to refresh, and you'll notice that we have an error message at the top of the page, but if I refresh again, the error message goes away. So if I add ASDF, actually let's add nothing. Let's just fill in a weird email here and a password so that we generate all of our error messages and click register. So we've got the password doesn't match the password confirmation, which is only the last one. It looks like it didn't actually iterate. So let's go back to notification.php. If errors, for each errors as an error, there should be more than one error on the errors message. All right, give me a few seconds to figure out why this is happening. All right, looks like I had an HTML issue. Basically what's happening is I'm creating multiples of these divs, and the styling is jamming them up at the top here, so it's not actually showing the right thing. The div actually needs to exist outside of the for each loop. So if you put your cursor next to the div, hold Alt and press up, it will go up a level, and then just tab it back. And then same with the bottom one, hold Alt, bring it down, tab it back, and then I'll just highlight these three and tab them in. And then we'll correct the success message as well. There we go. And then this center piece is a little too far in. So basically what will happen is this div will exist always as long as the condition is met, and then each of these will just error out in the div, so it should all appear. So now if you click register, you can see all your error messages all in one go. Cool. All right, so now we have error handling. So now if we fill this out, ASDF, ASDF, ASDF at asdf.com, ADSF at asdf.com, and our password is ASDF, and this is whatever, and click register, there's our error messages. The email must match the email confirmation, which it didn't, and the password doesn't match the password confirmation. However, if we do asdf.com, ASDF, ASDF, and hit register, we're now at our insert page, and we're ready to move on because we've passed our validation. So our next check after validation is normalization. So let's add sorry, not in this page, in insert.php. Let's add in our normalization. And normalization is going to be fairly simple. One thing I want to do is just make sure that the first name and last name are capitalized and with lowercase letters, just because people will fill out forms in all capitals or all lowercase. We just want to make sure that they're nice and formatted correctly. So we're going to normalize the string fields. So convert to lowercase, and then capitalize the first letter. So to do that, we do for each. We'll just do an inline array instead of creating an outside array because it's only two values as $field, right? Then our first step is to lowercase all the letters, so we'll just do string to lower. Gotta stop doing that. Keep trying to put in the field name itself. And then we'll uppercase just the first character of each word. And we're going to do it for each word because instead of just the one word, because sometimes people will put in two names, so we want to make them both uppercase. I'm not sure how it will deal with hyphens. If the person has a hyphenated name, I think it ignores the hyphen and will capitalize both words, but I could be wrong. Actually, there's a way for us to test that. If you go to Google and type in PHP Sandbox, this is a really handy way to test code. So you just come up here, hit enter a couple times. So we'll just take, we'll just echo UC words, and we'll do Margaret, whatever, Bethany. Oh, why am I capitalizing them? That's silly. Of course that's going to work. All right, so there we go. So we'll see whether or not UC words will actually ignore the dash. Nope, it doesn't. It treats it as one word. So you have to be careful and pay attention to that if you're trying to uppercase them both. But if you remove that and replace it with a space, as you can see, it uppercases both of them just fine. So yeah, it's kind of an issue, but not really an issue that we need to concern ourselves with. All right, so we're using UC words, which will capitalize each word in the past string based on spaces, which is correct. All right, I wrote notes on that. Now we want to normalize the email. The reason why I'm assigning these back to the form field is because there's no point in creating a brand new variable. We'll just overwrite this one piece of memory over and over again with its updated values, which is totally fine. So normalize the email. So all we're going to do to normalize the email is lowercase it. We already know it's in the correct format, so we don't need to sanitize it. String to lower, $_post, email. Oops. And there we go. We have a normalized email. And then last thing we want to do is normalize the password. Now, we're not going to uppercase, lowercase, or do any string formatting changes because by doing that, we will damage their password. We don't want to damage their password. We want to treat it exactly the way it is. However, we want to hash it. Hashing is the act of actually encrypting a string one way. This means that the string cannot be decrypted. Once it's encrypted, you can't go back the other way. Instead, when the user logs in, we take the provided password that they give us in the login form, which will be in plain raw text. We hash it and then compare the two hashes against each other. So PHP does some extra magic in the background depending on which algorithm you use to hash. Sometimes it adds salt based on the timestamp. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do. You can actually even create really robust password hashing algorithms. We're just using the simple default one that's built into PHP's password hash. It's called password default, but we have to tell it that's what we want to use. So once again, we're going to assign the result back to password. And that's totally fine because we're storing the hash, we're not storing the raw password. So the first argument that we have to give it is the string we want to hash, which is this password under post. And then the type of algorithm we want to use. So we're going to use password default. Go. Now's a good time, I think, to take a look at our values and what they look like. So we're going to do this twice. Where's normalization start? So we'll start up here and we'll do a var dump of $_post. So this way you can see what the values started as and then see what they look like when they're done. All right, so we're going to go here. We'll refresh. So it's Bob loves capitals. Bob at Bob. Bob at Bob. His password is obviously Bob. And then he's going to register. All right, so here's what's happened. So you can see the first name is all capital letters. The last name is all capital letters, but in our formatted strings, now it's Bob with just a capital B and 2 lowercase letters, and the last name is properly formatted as well. The email is bob.bob, all capital letters, and we've reduced it down to smaller case letters. We've also done it with, so email confirmation, notice it still remains the same way, but we don't care because we've passed our validation point, so we don't care if those two don't match. All of the validation needs to happen on the raw data, not the changed normalized data. Only ever on the raw data. That's why it's important to do validation first, then normalization. So then after normalization, we can notice that the password has changed from being Bob into this very bizarre formatted string. The string is 60 characters long in this scenario. Some algorithms will produce longer strings, some will produce shorter. But the idea is that this string is a one-way encryption. It can't be changed on the way it's encrypted. It's just that, sorry, it can't be decrypted. That's the idea. Interestingly enough, I think if I refresh, this hash changes. Yes, it does. So this hash is based on a salt that's likely defined by the time. So every time we do this, it will rehash the salt. So you should get a different password each time, which means if a user, say 2 users use the same password as test, each user will likely have a different hash in the database. So even if the user was, or even if a hacker was to pull both of them, it's impossible for him to tell that both those passwords were test. There's no way for him to tell that. All right, cool. So we have our passwords. We have all our normalization. Now we're moving on to sanitization. So sanitization is basically our way of taking any information they're providing us, and if it contains cross-site scripts or anything like that inside there, we're going to strip all that information out. Now, based on our current form, they can't do cross-site scripting in the email, at least not easily, because cross-site scripting, by the way, is JavaScript injection. They can't do JavaScript injection in the email because the email format would cause an error. They could try it in first name and last name, though, to see if they can hack us, because first name and last name take raw strings. However, we are kind of causing some issues because we are string to lower and UC words, which means we're uppercasing every word. So the tags would be kind of weird, but I don't think JavaScript cares if the tags start with capital letters or not. I think it just ignores that. So the only other bit in order to make sure that this doesn't happen is by getting it to treat things as raw text. So I'm going to show you how this works, and then we're going to attempt to hack ourselves, and then we'll see what the outcome of that is. I'm pretty sure we've done everything we need. So first we need to get our connection script. So we're just going to require our connection script, which is _connect.php. It's right here. We're using PDO for the connection script, which we need to write, like literally right now. Don't know why I didn't write it in. So we'll require once. So for the connection script, we need to write our PDO. Okay, so we're going to use a function for this. We're going to create our own function. And $host is going to be equal to the AWS address I gave you, because I don't want to publish that on YouTube. $user is equal to, again, the same details I gave you. If you started with the starter files, the details should be there. If not, I'll publish them to Blackboard for you, and you can grab all these values from Blackboard. $pass, again, will be published to Blackboard, and $db will be examples, is what we're going to use. Then we just create our connection. And the way PDO works is it does an object, so we'll do use equals new PDO, MySQL, so the name of the driver that you're using. Host is equal to, and we can use string interpolation here for this, so host. DB name is equal to, and again, string interpolation, $DB, and then the next two arguments it takes is the user and the password. Okay, and then we're just going to return the connection. Now we're not doing error handling here and checking for errors, and we'll do that in our last class. For now, we'll just use a simplified script. All right, so I'm going to pause this video for 1 second and then put these details on Blackboard, and then I'll navigate away from this script. All right, there we go. So the connection script now has the details in it, so that should be good. If I click refresh, I shouldn't see any errors. Yeah, I've got no errors, which is good. You can find those details on Blackboard, so just go to Blackboard and navigate to your lesson 8, and you'll see the details to connect to the AWS server. All right, so still following along with these inserts. So our next step is to actually create our connection, and the connection is a function, so it's not that big of a deal. So connect, and then we're going to write our SQL. The nice thing about PHP is that you can actually put the quotes on separate lines and then write your insert statement. So we're going to insert into users, because that's the name of the table that we created, these values. Okay. I'm going to just put my cursor here between these, hold Alt, put my cursor here, hit enter. And these are basically the same. They're written twice. The first ones are the actual column names, and the second ones are the placeholders that we use. They're called bound parameters for us to actually insert values into. So we'll do first name, last name, oops, last name, email, and password. And then hitting Control Alt, I think it is. Yeah, Control Alt, I can create 4 cursors by pressing down and then add the colon in front of all of them. So that's basically what it looks like. So these are the column names that are inside your table, and these are what you want to insert values into in this order. These are the bound parameters that you want to use to insert those values. And I generally make the bound parameters the same name as the column, but these are really just like almost like variable names. They're just symbol names. So it doesn't really matter what you call them, as long as you, when you do the binding, that you actually bind to the correct one. So we're going to do our bindings next. And we're going to sanitize by binding. So what binding will do is it will cast whatever the value is to a string literal. And I'm hoping that when it does the cast, it will make it so that it doesn't take in cross-site scripting. I might be wrong. I think I actually am wrong. I think we might have to do one extra thing to deal with cross-site scripting plausibilities. All right, so $STMT. Where am I getting that from? Nope, no. We need to prepare our statement. That's what we need to do first. So to prepare our statement, we create a variable called statement, or whatever you want to call it, $connection. And then we use the accessor operator, right, which we learned when we created our class. Prepare, which is the function name, or it's the method that's on con, and we pass it the value of SQL. And what it will do is it will prepare this and send this to MySQL and await values. Once the values are there and we insert the values, we can execute. This is more for like creating super efficient MySQL statements. When you have lots of things to insert, it makes it go a lot quicker. We're only inserting one, but we're really using it for the security idea of it, because prepared statements, when you insert the values, you can't insert SQL injection. So we don't have to worry about this. Will protect us against SQL injection. That's the whole idea here. So we're going to sanitize these values. Next, we're going to start binding the values, which is called bind param, to the parameters that we defined. So we defined first name as the name of the parameter. So this matches this, okay? And that's on purpose because they need to match. The value we want to bind to it, so first name, and the data type we want to force the value to be. So we're going to say you are a string literal. We're going to do this 4 more times. And because all 4 are basically the same, we can just double click on this, hit Control D, and type in the value. Double click on this, hit Control D, and type in the value. Then the last thing we can do is insert our new row. So we'll do that. So we'll do $STMT, execute. And that's it for the whole idea of writing our user and sanitizing. I want to double check that we can't insert JavaScript. So let's go back here and we'll refresh. And we're going to change the first name to be script tag. This is how I hacked most of you. So we'll do an alert. You have been hacked. Now that might not work because those are double quotes. Let's try using single quotes just because I think it might cause an issue here. Actually, it shouldn't cause any issue. It shouldn't be anything. Let's make sure we put that in. Let's do asdf@asdf.com. These all have to be filled out correctly because we don't want it to be invalid. asdf, and register. Okay, so nothing has happened in the normalization except for some reason this is now lowercase. There's no capitals here, but the other ones are capitalized. I'm not sure why I didn't capitalize this first letter. This is weird. Okay, let's check the database. So here's our database, here's our table. I'm just going to right click and choose to select the rows. And, oh no, you see this? It truncated it. That's super interesting. It truncated it. Oh, right, it truncated it because the field has a set limit size. And I think I made it super small. Yeah, it's only 30 characters. So we'd literally have to write this within 30 characters. So let's try that again and see if we can get it within 30 characters. I doubt we're going to get it into 30 characters, but we might. We'll just have to see. I'm going to truncate the table because it makes things a little easier. So truncate table. That'll just clear all the values in it. So now if you right-click on it and choose to select the rows, they're all empty. All right, then I don't have to create a unique user again. So I'm going to go back. And, okay, so those are each 7. 7 is 14. (14), 21, 23, you. I think we might be able to do that. That should be less than 30 characters. Register. Okay, never save in this page. Let's right-click and select the rows. Yeah, you see the whole script went in, which means that JavaScript will actually execute if we were to retrieve that value, and that means this would execute and we would be hacked, right? So we are protecting ourselves in the fact that the first name and last name only allow up to 30 characters to go in. So we are kind of protecting ourselves there, but they could get away with just including a script that's super, super small just to make it within that 30. But the script itself has tons and tons and tons of stuff in it. So we want to make sure we avoid that issue. So the way we're going to avoid it is we are going to add in our sanitization, sanitize first and last name to protect against cross-site scripting. All right, and the easiest way to do that would be we could write a for each loop, and we can actually do it just directly in line too. Why am I writing last name first? It's super weird. There, first name, last name as $field, post $field equals, and we can just use the filter var for this. So this is the second thing that I was talking about with filter var. If you do sanitization, it will actually return the sanitized whatever it is that you're doing. So first you give it the value that you want to sanitize, and then you pass in filters, sanitize, and you'll notice there's a whole bunch of these that you have available to you, and the one we want is a string. Okay. So now that we have that, we can go ahead and refresh this form, and it will insert that value. But remember, we have a unique issue turned on, so it won't insert it with the same data. So we're going to truncate the table. That way there's no values in there right now. So if I select there's no values, it's empty. Go back to our browser, refresh, hit continue, and notice that the string here is still the same way. The string here is still the same way because it's just normalized, right? But inside the database, the string is now entirely escaped. It's stripped out the script tags. It's replaced the quote characters with these HTML characters. This means this won't execute as JavaScript at all. It's been completely sanitized. We have no issue anymore. But notice the ASDF in the last name is untouched, and that's because it doesn't contain any bad values in it, right? So this has protected us against any possible issues, right? So we should be good. Let's move on. I'm going to leave this in here because I'm going to show you what's going to happen if we try this again and how we protect ourselves. So if I navigate back to the code, there it is. Actually, navigate back to our browser window. There we go. I'm going to hit refresh and continue. We're not going to see any errors, and I'm going to keep hitting refresh here. Refresh again. So there's like 4 people, right? If I select the rows, though, you'll notice that only 1 row has gone in. And the reason is because of that unique key. So the email address has to be unique. And that means that it won't allow any other entries that have the exact same email address to be entered into the database. We need to be able to see that and let the user know. Let's take a look at how we do that. Check for errors on the SQL insert. So we've already executed, so our next bit is to start a session just in case, right? So if we have any errors, we're going to use the session anyways because we're going to return back to like our login page and tell them they successfully created a new user. The first thing we're going to do is check the error code. So let's show you how you can actually see the error code. So if we var dump $ statement, because you have to call it on that, error code, that will show us the error code that we get. A good error code, meaning that everything was successful, will be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, so 5 zeros. If it's a fail, it'll be some other number. So we hit Control R, and sure enough, we have a 2300. Now, I've tried to find on the internet where these are referenced so that you know what is what, and I can't find references to the error codes. However, if you want to know what the error code is, you can simply var dump $ statement error info, and error info will actually output what the issue is. So if I refresh, duplicate entry key ASDF at asdf.com for key IDX user's email. Now, obviously, that's not a very good error message for a user. They're not going to understand what that means. They're not going to know what to do with this information. So instead, we're going to write a bit of logic that allows us to give them a better message, because we know that that's going to be our error code. Hopefully it's the same for everybody. It should be, because it's based on the driver, which is MySQL. So we're going to say if it equals 2300, which is or 23,000, yeah, 23,000, which is a string. I'm using triple equals, which means is equal to and the same data type. So we have to make sure we quote it. Then we're going to do $_ session errors, and we're just going to push directly onto this errors array. Even though we haven't declared it as an error, PHP super loose, right? Allows for so much crazy stuff. You have already registered. Please log in. There you go. And we'll just pass their session form values back to them. That's interesting. The logic that I wrote in, oh, right, okay, yeah. So we're going to pass their form values back to them. Else if $ statement error code does not equal 0, 0, 0, 0. This means if you didn't have a successful insert, which means your error code should be all zeros, then your session errors, push on the session error, there was an error during registration. Errors that would happen here would be if you tried to, trying to think of what errors you would have. I can't think of any. Like, even exceeding the limit will just truncate the value. So even if you were to try to insert more than 30 characters, as you saw, it would just truncate the value. The database doesn't care about strings. It's not going to cause any other issues. We're not going to wind up with fatal errors or any other type of error. So yeah, you're not really going to see an error code, I don't think. We can try it, though. We can try to add a long string in and see if it truncates it and produces an error message. So again, add the post field, right? Else, this else is different. This is a good else. Else, everything has been great, so we're going to add a new session, spelled with actual proper letters. Successes, which I bet you is not a word, equals you have been registered successfully. Please log in. And then we're going to redirect them. Header, location, .login.php, and then exit. And the reason why we're exiting is because the other two values will actually force them to be moved back to the form to go correct their problem. Because if they've tried an email address that already exists, maybe they want to do a different email address. So it doesn't make sense to send them to login. It makes sense to send them to register. And we'll exit. Okay, so just to walk through these steps, we're starting the session, right? Because the other session was started within an if condition. So this one will not apply because it will only execute if there were errors. And even if it does execute, we're exiting the script anyway. So this thing literally has no effect on us any further down in the code, nor is it available. Let's get rid of this var dump that we have here and the var dump that we spit out later on. We're iterating over first name and last name, and we're sanitizing those strings so that we don't have to worry about cross-site injections. We are writing our SQL statement using bound parameters. We bind the values to those parameters. So these are the values to those parameters, and we're casting them as strings. Then we execute. Then we start our session, and we check our error codes. If we have a 2300, it's a duplicate email, so then we tell them that. If it's any other error, which I don't know what would cause any other error, but if there's any other error, we just give them like a super generalized error message and send them back. And then otherwise, you have been registered successfully, please log in. Otherwise, we send them back to register.php. So if I refresh, we're going to get you have already registered, please log in. Let's try really super long usernames and last names. asdf@asdf.com, asdf. I'm just curious if we'll get an error message. Oh, right, we already did this. asdf@asdf.com, Control A, C, Tab, Control V. There we go. asdf. Register. Oh, see, so no errors. So even if it's long, there's no errors, but I bet you the database truncated the number of characters. Oh yeah, guaranteed it did. Yeah. It also capitalized them incidentally. Okay, so now we're ready to log in, and we can log in with any of those, asdf@asdf.com and asdf, and click login, and we hit a blank page because now we need to authenticate. But this registration script is all complete for us, and we're good to go. So there's our insert. We've done register, we've done index profile and notification. So now our next step is on authentication. When the user passes their details, their username and their password, it comes through to us as raw text. And I'll show that by var dumping the $_post. Refresh. See, asdf@asdf.com and the wonderful secure password asdf. So because they come through as raw data, we can use that raw data to figure out how we're going to authenticate the user against their password. So authentication, not a really difficult thing to do. It's pretty simple. Basically, here's the steps. The user enters the username and email. The user details are put in the post body and sent to an authentication script. So not much different than this setup. Same idea. We wind up with a post body, only now we only have email and password, and it's going to authenticate.php. So once we get it, if the user exists, we look up to check to see if the user exists. If the user exists, we pull the user back, we take the provided password that's in the post body, hash it, and compare it to the hash password in the database. If the password is valid, a session variable is declared and we assign it the user's information, and then we can use that session variable to figure out whether or not they're authenticated. If they are invalid, or if they don't exist, then we take them back to the login form and tell them to correct their user details. So our user login form is very simple. We're not going to repopulate the login form. There's no reason to. The user should have entered their information incorrectly. We'll take them back to a blank login form where they can enter the email address and the password again. So our first step is to start a session, because everything we need to know is in the session values. And what? No, we're not starting a session. Sorry, take that back. Get rid of that. Let's try that again. Let's connect to the database. That's what we want to do. Connect to the database. So we're going to require underscore connect.php, because that's where our connection script is, and then we're going to connect. We're going to create our SQL with a bound parameter, right? Because we don't want SQL injection, and it can definitely happen at this point. So select star from users where email is equal to :email. Okay, so we have our bound parameter to stop any SQL injection. Obviously, then we have to go through the same steps that we usually go through with preparing the SQL, right? So we're going to do $statement equals $con, prepare $SQL. So we'll prepare our SQL. Then we're going to bind the value to the placeholder. Statement bind param email $_post email PDO param string. So that will cast it into a string. And then we can execute. $statement execute. So if we have a user, it will have been brought back and it will be sitting underneath our statement. So now we need to be able to get the user from the statement. And the way we do that is first we're going to check for errors just to make sure we don't have any, right? So we'll do a session start. And remember, any SQL errors we have to basically check within SQL. So we do the if $statement error code, which, I mean, the only way we should really have an error code is if we have formatted our SQL statement incorrectly. Otherwise, we shouldn't really have an error code. So we'll just give them a generic response. You could not be authenticated. Please check your email or password or register for an account. And then we're not going to do that. We'll just redirect them back. Header, location, login.php, and we'll exit. So we'll just redirect them back to the login page. I think that works out. Otherwise, and we'll just write this to check for SQL errors, because that's really where it's coming from. Okay, so next we're going to fetch the user. And fetching the user is pretty easy. It's just $user. I would actually say it's even arguably easier than MySQLi, because it's just $statement fetch, and this will return back a single row, the first row it finds from this result set. Okay, so even if it returned back 25 users, you would only get the first user it actually found. Then we can say if there's no user or password verify, which is our way of verifying the password. We pass it the raw password first, so just the password they gave us in their form, and we give it the hash password second. Okay? If there's no password or if there's no password or password verify fails, right? I noticed in my notes I didn't write it that way, but that's exactly what you need, or the password verify fails. Then you're going to create a error on the errors that says you could not be authenticated. Please, I'm just going to copy this because it's literally the same message. And I'm super lazy. There we go. Otherwise, $, no, we're not doing that. Then we'll just redirect them. Same deal. Wham. I mean, we could just write this whole thing in one go. I think that would be almost easier. So instead of doing this again and again, we'll just do or, because it's literally applicable for all of that. But we're going to need to fetch the... Oh, yeah, that's why I didn't do it. Because you need to fetch the user first. Yeah, it's better to keep it separated so it's not confusing. You could fetch the user before this and still check for the error code. It wouldn't really make a difference, but I want to keep it separated just so it's a little easier to understand. So, based on this code here, we should be able to check to see if we're authenticated. So let's go to our page. Refresh, hit continue. Use of undefined constant user, assumed user on line 29. I'm probably writing JavaScript again. Yes, I certainly am. Here we go. There we go. Add a $sign in. Refresh. Continue. Ooh, blank page. That's because we don't have our success part yet. We need to write our success part. So we successfully were logged in. We just need to write the next piece. But you know what? Just before we write that, I want to see it fail. So I'm going to refresh. And I'm going to change this from Sean McKinnon to asdf@asdf.com, right? And the password I'm going to write will be, there we go, log in. So we failed and we returned back to the page to correct our details. However, I don't see the notification message, which I should see. So that's kind of interesting. Let's go to login. The reason is because we're missing the actual notification thing, so that would be the problem. So let's include notification.php, right, on our login page, just underneath the body tag. Hit Control R, and there we go. You have been registered successfully. Please log in. So it still has our old message in it. So let's do asdf@asdf.com and gobbledygook and log in. You cannot be authenticated. Please check your email or password or register for an account. So let's try an email address that doesn't exist. You cannot be authenticated. Please check your email or password or register for an account. Now, this autofill that's happening here, this is Chrome doing this. It's autofilling in what it thinks I want in here. Log in. There we go, blank page. So let's deal with that now. So if we go to authenticate, what we're going to do is first we're going to unset the user password. We don't want to pass it to the session. We don't want to store it. Next, we're going to store the user. And this is for a couple of reasons. One, so that we can tell that they're logged in. Two, so we have access to all their personal information, and then we can actually give them a personal experience. And then we're going to redirect. First, we'll add the successes message. You have successfully logged in. And then we're going to relocate them to the profile page. And exit. So if we refresh, hit continue, boom, we've successfully logged in. Don't know why it's coming up as an error. Oh, yeah, I do. We need to fix that. So in notification.php, a little bit too much copy and paste. This isn't alert danger, this is alert success. So we got to keep that like that. And then we'll go to our profile page. So if I refresh, we have some issues. Undefined variable user. We're trying to access things that aren't defined, and likely because I'm accessing user email and all this user stuff, but I haven't wrote the script to fetch the user. So why don't we do that next? We'll fetch our user and write all that at the top. Okay. So first we'll start our session. So this is one of those pages that I was talking about. That's why we have to do the check in notification, because this page uses a session in order to check to see if anybody's authenticated. So the only people allowed to access the profile.php are authenticated users. So we want to check if the user is logged in, and we can do that by doing an is set. Is this key set? Because if it isn't, if they're not, then we're going to add a session error. You must log in first. And then we're going to redirect them back to the login.php page. And exit, because we don't want the rest of this to render, right? Otherwise, we're going to take user and we're going to assign it to the session user, and we're not going to clear it though, so don't unset it. Just set it once and leave it as set, okay? So now if I go here and hit refresh, there you go, and it generates a nice little picture. Hello, alert you, ASDF. Welcome, champion. Your personalized experience awaits you. Notice this JavaScript is not executing, right? Because we've sanitized it. If we hadn't have sanitized it, it would execute and we would have an issue. All right. I want to log out. Does nothing, just goes to the logout page. Logout is super, super simple though. Let's write our logout page, and we'll even make it so that the logout can only be accessed by a logged in user, right? And this is called authenticating our views, right? But we're also authenticating our process script, because logout will just be a processing script. So if they're not logged in, redirect them, right? Makes sense? So if not is set, $_session, right? User. So that will tell us whether they're logged in or not. If they're not, then let's add an errors. You must log in. They don't need any more information than that. Header. There we go. Send them back to login PHP and exit the script. Otherwise, logging out means just simply destroying the session variable. That's all it takes. We just have to unset the session. So unset $_session user. Gone. They're logged out. Then redirect with a success message. $_session successes. Oops. Equals you have been successfully logged out. Congratulations. Let's redirect them to location. index.php, which is our home page, right? Send them right back to home and exit. Nice and simple. Really, you could get away with not doing this because it doesn't matter. We're just clearing and just sending them back. But this message becomes confusing, and if somehow they wind up navigating to logout directly, you don't want them to be hitting this accidentally, right? So if we refresh, there we go. You have been successfully logged out. If we try to access the profile page directly, so I'm just going to edit this and go to profile.php and hit enter. You'll notice it kicks us right back to login and says you must log in first. So if I log in as ASDF, ASDF.com, ASDF, and log in, there you go. Hello, can jingle blah, 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 blah. Welcome, champion. Your personalized experience awaits you, and you have successfully logged in. Log out. Nice. So we have validation, sanitization, normalization, authentication, right? All completed in this one lesson. Didn't even take that long. Not actually sure how long it took. Took a bit of time. But either way, we've got everything done. There is a lab. So let's navigate to scm.education. Let's go to our lesson for today, which is authentication. Scroll down to the lab. Waja. So labs 7 and 8. So this is worth 2 labs in total, a total of 6% of your final grade. So it's definitely worth doing. It basically reinforces these 2 lessons. If you're wanting more information about validation, sanitization, and normalization, please take a look at lesson 32 there, which is actually lesson 7. I want you to submit your GitHub and Heroku links pointing to your working code. Okay? This is a key piece here, pointing to your working code. If your code is not working on Heroku, you lose those 10 points, even if you have the Heroku link. So if it doesn't work, don't even bother submitting the link. Okay? Only if it's working. I will give partial marks, though. So submit it if at least some of it is working. 20 points for all steps working and completed. 10 points for clean code formatting. Now, I haven't been enforcing this, but I'm going to start. If all your code looks like this, you need to fix it, okay? So that it's nicely tabbed in, so that it looks nice and clean. If your code is like this, this is not clean formatting. For every page I hit, until I run out of those 10 points, for every page I hit that it isn't clean formatted, you lose 1 point. Okay? So make sure the whole page is nicely, cleanly formatted. I don't care if it's like this, because the PHP can be in line with the code. That's totally fine. I do care if you have nested things and they're not tabbed in. Okay? So make sure you're nesting properly and your code looks clean. One key hint: if you write beautify my PHP, there's an online PHP beautifier. You're going to take all this, Shift Tab, Control A, Shift Tab, Tab, Tab. Okay. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it here. And then I'm going to say beautify my PHP. And see what it does? It makes it all nice and beautiful. Tabs it in for me, gives me everything the way I want it. Okay? So you can always use PHP beautifier if for some reason you're having an issue. Cool. Get the base code from Blackboard. So the code you need for the lab is on Blackboard underneath the labs. Complete the steps only in the 2 files, insert.php and authenticate.php. If you look at the code, it says step. Do the ones that say step. Don't do the ones that don't say step. Okay? When you deploy your code, make sure you don't include a .env.php file. You shouldn't need that file really anyways. Your connection script should just be the Amazon connection details. So you can connect directly to. I told you what to connect to, what table it is, and what database to connect to. So just connect to that database and that table. If you have any issues, contact me on Slack, contact me through email. Also, this isn't due till next Monday for Monday's class at 11 p.m. or Thursday's class at 11 p.m. Okay? Or sorry, midnight. So if you have any issues, just let me know. hopefully everything goes okay. Hopefully the recording is good. Hopefully this all works out. Yeah, so have a great week. Cheers.